How do you judge the effectiveness of an American president? What most people do is they look at the economy, and if the GDP number is up and employment is low and there's no war, then they typically regard that president as a successful president, as an effective president. Now, I think this is a mistake because the economy at any given point in time is a result of so many factors, and some of those factors are completely outside the control of the president. Nonetheless, right or left, Democrat or Republican, people will typically look at the economy during a president's term, and if the economy did well, they'll regard that presidency as a success. And this is reinforced by politicians as well. I mean, every president, almost every president, going back to at least Roosevelt, would ask the question, are you better off under my leadership than under my predecessor's leadership? Now, this is especially a mistake for those of us who are more rightward in our politics, because we typically believe in small and limited government. And yet, when we give presidents too much blame and too much credit for the economy, we kind of tempt them into usurping more power, right? Because obviously, if we're going to blame a president for the state of the economy, then that president and other government officials are going to try to fix it. And we don't want them to fix it. We want, for the most part, for them to stay out of the economy or promote policies that only involve minimal regulation. So this analysis leads to bigger, more intrusive government, but it's also just wrong. As I stated previously, the economy in any given period of time is a function of many factors, and many of those factors are completely outside the control of the president. For one thing, under the Constitution, even though the presidency is a very strong office, it's also a limited office. It's limited by other branches of government. Congress, of course, passes laws. They're the legislative branch, so they vote on the budget, they vote on other bills that affect the economy. And then there are some institutions that are completely outside of those branches. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve has had an enormous impact on the economy. Now, I would argue there shouldn't even be a Federal Reserve, but that's a discussion for another time. Nonetheless, the Federal Reserve has loomed large over our economy, and that's why presidents often fall into the temptation of trying to pressure them to lower interest rates. It is also a reflection of trends that take place in our society and issues that fall outside of government. I use Social Security as an example. When Social Security was passed in the 1930s, Americans had much shorter lifespans. This meant that they would retire, they would collect benefits for a few years, and then they would pass away. Well, people are living much longer now, and they're collecting benefits for many years after they retire. And this has had a huge impact on these programs. And every administration since the 1930s has had to deal with this challenge. So this is a perfect example of how not only past decisions from government, but also trends within our culture have an impact on the economy in the present. Okay, well, if you can't judge the effectiveness of a president based on the present state of the economy, how do you judge a president? And for this, I offer the following criteria. First, I ask the question, with the power that is given to the president under the Constitution, did he use that power effectively? The presidents have a lot of power when it comes to foreign diplomacy. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military. Granted, Congress has to declare war, Congress has to vote on funding wars, but the president has a lot of control over the use of the military. Did he use that power effectively? Did a president use his appointment power effectively? Presidents appoint people to a lot of different positions, none of which are more consequential than the appointments to the Supreme Court. So a question one could ask is, did the president appoint good judges to the court? A president can have an impact on policy for many years after his tenure just by who he appoints to the court. Another way we can judge a president is by asking, did he at least promote good policies? policies that are rooted in sound economic philosophy? Was he able to advance those policies at all? Some people say that we should judge a president more on what he does than what he says. What he says is important too, though. And what he does, of course, is limited by other branches of government. So this is something that has to be taken into account as well. I'll give a president credit if he promotes good policies, makes a reasonable effort to advance those policies, and has at least some success. By way of example, during the Reagan administration, I thought he promoted very good tax policy. Not perfect by any means, but good tax policy. That policy was limited to some degree by the opposition he faced in Congress. Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House, was a very effective, powerful Democrat who limited some of what President Reagan was trying to do. And that, of course, is just our system of government. But I think Reagan was very effective in at least pushing good policies and having some success with them. I would also ask, did a president make reasonable compromises? A president is always going to have to make compromises on his agenda. Again, this is because you have different branches of government, and you usually have the political opposition having some power within those branches. So you have to make compromise. Compromises are part of the political process. Were they good compromises? Were they reasonable compromises? I would also ask whether any given president has comported himself with confidence. Now, this might not be as important as the kind of policies he pushes, but his confidence is very important. And for this, I use the example of Franklin Roosevelt. Probably didn't agree with a single one of his policies. I think his policies were actually pretty terrible. Nonetheless, he always comported himself with confidence. And this was very important during World War II and during the Depression. So, does a president comport himself with confidence? This is another important criteria. If presidents followed this criteria, I think they would be much more effective, because they wouldn't be spending their entire tenure trying to push up this GDP number and lowering the unemployment rate. They would actually focus on pushing policies that added to the long-term health of the economy and the long-term health of the nation.